Alright, welcome back to another episode. In this episode, I am going to do probably the most chopper thing there is to do, and that is hardtail your swing arm frame. So there is a few different ways you can do this. You can buy pretty well a complete weld on, and then, as it states, cut it in a few places and weld it on. But I'm going to do this the hard way and the cheap way. So I'm going to bend this rear section up from scratch. All I'm going to use is a couple of cast axe plates and my bent up rear gearbox plates, and we're going to make this thing from scratch. I think this will probably be a 2-video part. I might go through in this video. I think I'll bend all the bits up, get it all maybe tacked in position, and then the next episode we'll completely weld this thing out. I'll go through the welding process, show you everything along the way, and then we can ship this thing off back to the customer. So let's get into it. Alright, so where do we start with our frame? This might be a newly purchased frame that you just got and you want to hardtail it and then put all your bike stuff into it. Maybe you've had this frame for ages. Either way, you are cutting into this frame and you're going to have to repaint this thing anyway. So you might as well check out how structurally sound this thing is. So the guy I'm doing this frame for, he's just bought this thing, and he wants to do the hardtail. Obviously, he's got a bunch of bits for a bike he wants to put together. And when he got this frame, it has this rake job in it. So this is another super common chopper mod here, is to put some rake in your neck. Now, depending on who's done this is sort of depending on how well it's been done. So a lot of the times, just like this, they are absolutely full of bog. Bogged like no end. You Americans love your Bond or Bondo, whatever you guys call it, and you just sink this stuff into anything. And if you're any good with Bondo, you can make it look like this and it looks fucking sweet. But in my experience, sometimes when you dig into these things, underneath it is an absolute war zone. You would not trust it if you had seen underneath it. So what I always do with these things, if they've had a mod like this and it's been Bondoed up, I always chip all the Bondo out and have a look. Really good judge of how well the fabricator was. So as you can see, I have chipped all the Bondo out of this piece here, and as you can see, it's really not done that bad. A lot of the times when you see this, like old choppers, they'll have, you know, they didn't really have the welding technology we do now. Like back in the whatever 40s and 50s and 60s, you know, they had fuck all welding. They were mostly oxy welding. So a lot of the stuff you find is all oxy welded, which is absolutely terrible. Don't get me wrong, there's probably some really good oxy welders, but 9 times out of 10, when you chip this bog away from an old frame, it is horrendous under there. So I chipped all the bog away on this side, and as you can see, it's all pretty well nice steel. I'm looking for some porosity in the welds. There's a little bit here, but it's not enough to warrant chopping this thing off and doing it again. I reckon this will be fine. I reckon it will hold up just nicely. So that is pretty well going to be fine. I'm just going to leave that neck alone and focus on our rear section here. So probably one of the most important things is where you're going to chop this rear end. So you want to chop this thing in, you know, sort of the easiest way and the least amount of cuts, and whatever's going to make your life super easy to attach the, you know, the hardtail to. So you want to be really strategic where you cut this thing. So I've done a few of these now. I've done it a few different ways. So I sort of have a way that I'm stuck with that is super nice, and I find it's the easiest way to do it. Makes your life easy once you come to weld your new tubes in and stuff. So usually when I do this thing, I try and leave this top section alone where these 2 tubes come in and meet your backbone. Usually you can just sort of put it in right here just before it starts to bend, and then you can blend it pretty nice and then you don't see it. Then you don't have to worry about playing with this seat post support here, and don't have to weld it all into your top tube here. But I don't know what is going on with this rear section. I don't know, but as you can see, this is not how a stock swing arm frame looks. I'm not sure what someone's done here. I'm not sure why the swing arm's all the way up here, or I got no idea, and I don't want to try and work it out. So I'm just going to chop this thing off completely and forget we ever saw this. So obviously, because it's been connected here already, I sort of don't want to connect it there again, just because, you know, you're putting shit on top of shit on top of shit. I want a clean slate. I want to make sure this thing is strong. I want to make sure I'm welding good steel to good steel. I don't want, you know, someone's porosity or they used the wrong rods or wrong wire or God knows what. So I think I'm going to take this all the way back to our backbone here, which means, once again, this is covered in bog. This frame has got to come from America, the amount of Bondo in it. So I'm going to have to remove all this Bondo here because I want to cut, this is a cast piece under here, this support. I want to be able to cut this in a way that I can put my new tube in and leave this cast bit alone, or maybe I'm going to have to chop it and just give it a little bit of a clock, but I want to be able to reuse that and then obviously get rid of all this crap. So the other place I'm going to cut it is right here, just in front of our fifth mount. So when I say fifth mount, this is the mount here where the end of the gearbox bolts to, and that supports it when you kick it. So it's going to be nice if I don't have to weld that back on. So if I was to cut it through here, just behind that, I can leave that alone, and then all I have to do is replace our rear gearbox mount here. The other thing I want to keep is our little support here. This is our gearbox support, this guy that goes through here. I've actually built some frames that didn't have this, and this thing is super important. What this thing does is this sort of spreads the load of the gearbox. So the gearbox is pushing the frame forward. That's where your thrust is coming from. It's through the gearbox. So if you don't have this support, this front engine gearbox mount pushes itself through your down tube. So you want to connect all this together and make this one big strong unit. So I want to keep that original, and I'm going to cut it back here on our gearbox little tapped plate. So these little tap slugs, I'm going to cut it right on top of that, and so when I put the new bit on, it's going to be in exactly the same place, so I can just weld that to our new gearbox studs at the back. So basically where to start with this thing, you want to buff all the paint off in all the areas that you're going to cut and weld. So I'll go through now, I'm going to buff all this off, try and get as much of this Bondo crap out as I can, because I'm going to need to get in there and cut this up. So here, 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 and all around here, I'll go through and let's prep this thing up. Alright, so that is pretty well all the bits sort of uncovered that I want to see. Obviously, what I was using was just a wire wheel on my grinder. These are the best just to get the bog out of the way so you don't have to try and chip it and mess around. These rip it out super quick and don't affect the steel underneath. You don't want to do this with a grinding wheel because you will chip away all the steel that you want to keep nice. So you want to use a buff like that. That keeps the steel nice but takes the bog away. So this is basically what I wanted to look at here. Now what I'm looking for is, obviously this is not a factory connection here. So someone has welded this on. You can see this is where they've grafted it sometime before, and then it's been fucked with here as well. So not exactly sure what's going on there, but this is good. So this is why we uncover this stuff. I want to take this all the way out to cut it through here and take this tube completely out. So if you have a look underneath, this is that little cross section that I was talking about. So this support is cast. I want to try and keep that. And you can see it's been sort of booger welded on here once before as well. So I'm gonna chip this. Oh, you can see bog covers so much stuff too. See how dodgy these welds are in here? And this big gouge out of the frame here. That's what I'm talking about. You don't want to use a grinder to remove this stuff. Someone's just come in here red hot with a grinder and fucked all the steel up. So I'm gonna have to fix this. We're gonna cut all this out, grind this nice and flat so there's no gouges in it. And you can see this weld is full of undercut. Looks like a very dodgy weld, maybe done with a stick welder or a MIG welder that wasn't set right by the looks. So these are the other bits. You can see, I'm not sure what the go with this thing is they're welded on here, but this is sort of intersecting where we're gonna cut it. So I've got my pen here. Like I said, we wanna be on the inside of this fifth mount. I wanna cut it here because I'm gonna put a slug in the steel here, inside the tube, which my other tube will butt into, and then we'll have a nice butt weld around the whole thing. So I want to keep as much of this tube here as I can. So I'm going to cut this sort of back here, somewhere there, and this one in the same spot. So that'll be cut somewhere there. Obviously I'm going to get rid of this bit of steel here, that's no big deal. And then up here I'm going to cut through these guys like that, and then I'm going to fix up this tube so it's super nice. And then obviously I'll have to cut these tubes out of here so that we keep this sort of cross beam casting piece all in one piece and super nice. So I'll go through and cut that guy off now, and then we can start working out, you know, our rear section. Alright, so I have majority of the rear section chopped off here. Just a little trick. You don't have to cut this off all in one piece. Like, you don't have to try and, you know, cut this all out nicely. Sometimes it's easier just to take off a majority like this and then tackle the little bits like this. Just because then you can get the grinder in there on weird places and you don't have the tubes in your way, and you can get right in there and just get out the stuff that you want to get out. So that's basically what I've done. Gotten rid of this ugly as hell rear section. If anyone wants that, it's yours, you can have it. But as I said, I have left as much tube as I can here. Obviously I have cut on the backside of our fifth mount here so that I can cut these square now and I can get a nice butt in there. And then I've also left this so that when we put the new gearbox support at the back here on, it'll be nice and I can just weld this straight on because it's going to be in exactly the same spot, because this has to be in the same spot. So that's pretty well all that. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to cut this out now. Like I said, it's all been smoothed here, which is not good. You can see here where it has started to cut into the tube. So you don't want to take any material away from the tube because that makes it weaker. So you only ever want to add. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut this thing way back here, way out of the way, and then grind the rest in. Just because if we cut in here and then we cut into the tube, we have to fix it. It's easier to, take some more away than to put it back. So I'm going to cut this way out here, and where this support is, I'm going to cut it way out here, and then just grind it to where I want it to be. So I'll go through and do that now. Alright, so I went through and you can see the casting that I'm trying to get out of all this welded crap. All this was like booger welded in and no good. So I've just managed to cut this out. You can see that's where the original tube was welded to. So as I said, I've left it long so that I can come in with my flat disc and make all this super nice. And then you can see on this, I left the welds on. So you can see there, see I've left the welds on and I've just cut the pipe out. So doing it like that, filling a weld here is fine, like a gap, filling a gap over here is fine. If you do it like this, you don't cut into the casting and then you weld it all together anyway. So it turns out super strong doing it like this. So I'm just gonna clean this up, I'm gonna clean all this crap up. Clean all these connections up. You want a clean slate when you start joining the new stuff together. You don't want to be still grinding stuff off after you've put the new stuff on. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to clean this all right up nicely, and then I'm going to whack it in our jig. We can start working out how we're going to do the rear section and what sort of rake and all that sort of stuff we've got in this. So when we come back, all this will be ready to go, ready to weld the new section on. Alright, so I have fixed all this up now. You remember before, this is all just like a covered plate. So this has all the right shapes now. Like this little guy sometimes has a hole in it, and that's where your oil filter bolts to. So that is a top casting, all revived, ready to go. So that's that. These guys, I've just cut them square and somewhere near the right length. They don't have to be exactly the same. But I've also put this big chamfer on here. So the idea of this chamfer is I want to be able to grind this weld completely flat so this looks seamless with the new tube that for the rear section. So by putting a big chamfer in this side and the other side, we can weld this completely up, and then when we grind the top off the weld, all our weld will still be there. If we just had two straight edges butted togeted and then welded the top and then ground it off, we're basically just grinding all the weld off we've just put on. So by putting this chamfer on, when we grind this all flat and make it seamless, we will still have a nice strong weld in there. So I've done that on both sides. This guy I've just cleaned up, taken all the paint off, because our gearbox support bolting little guy will fit somewhere here and we can weld that straight back on. So basically I've just got this in my jig, as you see. My jig is probably a little bit elaborate for what you need. I've just done this because I do a lot of modifications and stuff as well, and I wanted this super strong because I do whale on stuff with a hammer sometimes. But you can get the ones that are just like a bit of box section with this backbone, and they're fine too. They're sometimes good because you can rotate them and weld underneath, but you need some sort of jig to do this. Don't go to your buddy's house that's just got a backyard stick welder and do this on the concrete floor, you know? You want to put this in a jig and weld it up because you want it to be straight for one, and this needs to be super strong, otherwise this guy will come apart while you're on the highway. So make sure if your buddy reckons he can do it, he can actually, you know, use a welder. So all this is pretty sorted out. All I need to do now, it's all bolted down. I have this guy here that puts pressure straight down, so these two are flat. I always run a bit of tube underneath because some of these little things here have, you know, they cut a neck down a little bit and all sorts. So by running them, the frame is dead flat on the bench and I don't have to worry about any of this stuff. Also, when I weld it, I can get a little bit further under here and get a tack on that. So 2 reasons why I do that. Anyway, next thing's next. We need to start bolting our axle plates over there. I need to bolt them to my jig here, and then we're gonna start with bending this bottom tube first. That's gonna be super easy because it's just one bend. We just have to get the degrees bang on and we'll be sorted. So I'm gonna set my bender up, bolt those guys in, and then we'll come back and talk about bending this guy. Alright, so I have my frame here all mounted in the jig. I have it all locked down. I have it all perfectly centered. And the way we do that, I have a center line down the center of my jig here. I'm not sure if you can see it, but I just put a square on one side of the frame and then use my rule to the center and then do the same the other way. When both measurements are the same, you know the frame is in the center. So all this is locked down, all solid. I have put my axle plates in my jig here, measured, made sure they're the same heights. I haven't locked down the angle yet, just because I want to see how this bend interacts with this bend. I sort of want these so that our top tube is straight. So I would like this tube and our rear legs to be perfectly straight together. So that is pretty well bang on there. So I'm going to leave them where they are, and maybe I'll move them once I do this bottom tube. So where do we start next? Well, we need a fucking measuring device first. So I have my measuring device here. So like I said, we have our bevel in our tubes already. So I want to start with our bottom tube first, just to get all that sorted, and then we'll come across and do our top tubes here. So where do we start? Basically where we start, we take a rough measurement and cut the pieces we want to use first, and then we'll work out where the bend starts. So all we do is pretty simple. We just get our measuring tape and whack it in here and go somewhere close. So you want to measure this so you've got a bit of waste this side and this side. So the reason you do that is then after you've done the bend, you can move it a bit like this, back and forth, and work out where it wants to be, and then we'll mark it and cut it in the spot we want it to be. So basically I've already done that. Here is our pieces. They turned out to be 500, so I've cut 2 of them, and that's good. So the next thing we need to work out where this bend's going to start. So we need some sort of a reference point to transfer to our bender so that we know where the bend's going to be. So there's not much point just willy-nilly bending something somewhere here and hoping for the best. We're actually going to mark something. So now I need a fucking pen. Alright, so I have my little trusty paint pen here. Now, an easy way to do this, there's a few different ways you can do it, but the simplest way to do it is, I have a bit of tube here that I have already bent in my bender. So what I did was, I put a mark on the pipe where it lines up with something on the bender. I'll show you which part it is, but this mark here lines up with the end of the die, and then I know that this is how long before the bend starts. So what I'm going to use this line as a reference. So I'm going to mark this line on this tube so I know where the bend's going to start, and then when I put it in the bender, she'll be sweet. So this is our mark, and then so that direction like that, that's where the bend's going to start. So all we do is we put this up against here. So we want to make sure that this tube has a little bit of waste both sides, like I said. So I'm just going to put that there. So we've got 30 mil of waste there. Put this in here like that. Line up our bend, and then put our mark on. So I'm just lining up so that this here is going to intersect our axle plate on the right angle. Like I said, this is all pretty rough. We're going to cut this down and make it perfect after we've bent it. So this is our mark. We want the bend to go this direction. Make sure you put the arrow on it, because if you have the bend go that direction, it's going to start way too far back here and then it's fucked. So make sure you have your direction of your bend. We want the bend to go that direction. And the last thing we need to know is what degrees to bend this thing to. Now, there's a few different ways you can do this. If, like me, I've done quite a few, I already know what this degrees is around about, but you can do it another way as well. Let me show you. So this guy here is a little angle finder. So I can just move it and it tells me what angle it is on this guy. So all we do with that is you just get a bit of pipe. I think there's one over here. So we just get a bit of pipe and we put it in our axle plate like that. And then we just maneuver this like this. Which way should I do it? I think this is not going to work very well. So I'm just going to roughly do this. So we do it like that, and then when it's the right angle, we have a look. So I know that this should be about 32 degrees, and this is saying 33 degrees. So I'm going to bend this at about 32 degrees, and we can always give it a tweak from there. We'll just do a initial bend, and then we'll tweak it and mess around with it before then. Something else that is going on with this frame that's a little bit different. So with an early frame, like your knuckle through pan, I think it changes when it goes generator shovel. I'm not 100% sure, but tube sizes change. So these axle plates are 1-inch ID. So a 1-inch OD tube will fit into our axle plates here. But because this is a later model frame, the tube is 1 1/8 inches. So I want to use the correct size tube as the rest of the frame so it has a seamless transition into our brand new rear section. If I was to use inch, you would have this big dirty step because this is so much smaller than the tube that's already on here. So this tube doesn't fit in our axle plates here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to machine some slugs that go in the axle plate, and they're going to stick out, I don't know, maybe 1 inch, and that's going to go inside of this tube, and then we're going to do a nice weld around the outside. So it'll be super strong and it'll never break. But before I do that, I just want to sort of get this bend sussed out and have a look at it, and then I'll make some slugs. We have to do this both sides because we're going to have to slug into the original frame as well. So I'll do like 1 inch into the original frame and then 1 inch into the new frame, and then I'll be a perfect weld around it, and then it's super strong through that joint. There's literally twice the material through our connection joint and there's no way it'll break there. So let's go over the bender and bend this guy real quick. Alright, so this is my trusty little bender here. You guys have seen this a million times if you've watched my other bending videos that I've done, but basically, like I said, the only thing we have to worry about is the direction that this is going to bend. So with my bender, when we bend this, it draws the tube through. So the bend is going to happen after our line. So we're going to make sure the arrow is pointing the right direction. So all we do is we knock this in here. And as I said, every bend is going to be different. So do just like a test bend and then put a mark somewhere on the jig that is always going to line up. So on my machine, I just do it at the start of the die. So we pull it around from the start of the die. So that when you transfer that mark onto your actual job and put your line in there, you're always going to have the bend where you want it. So I have that in the right spot now. Let's tighten this up. Sweet. And on the side of my bender here, I have a little indicator. So like I said, this bend is usually like 32 degrees. So I'm going to come through, I'm going to do the 32 degrees, and then if it needs a little tweak afterwards, we can always put it back in here, or we can take a little bit out. We can always play around with it a little bit. It's not that rigid. So all we do is draw this thing through. So that's on 30. So you always want to go a little bit over. So it'll always spring back a bit. So you've got to allow for the spring. So you go a little bit past it and then pull it back and have a look what it is. So a little bit past it, pull it out, put it back on like this. So that's about 30. So we want to go a little bit more. There we go, that's like 32. So, pull this thing out, and there is our bend. Super nice bend, no distortion, and we'll go see if it's right, I suppose. Alright, so basically all I'm going to do, just to see how I went, I'm just going to line this thing up. Like I said, I'm going to put slugs in this thing yet. So, all we do is we put our little packers under there and line this up. So I want to go a little bit more, I think. Oh no, that sort of works there. There's no right and wrong really, you just want to make sure this works. Make sure you do both sides the same and it will be gravy. But I'm going to put a little bit more bend in this. So I'm going to go another degree or just so, and then we'll try it again. Alright, so let's try this again. That's freaking better. So that's the angle I want. You can sort of maneuver this a little bit so it lines up here, and then you can move this bend forward or aft a bit, but at the end of the day, this has to line up really nicely to slide into our little slug that we're going to put in here. So that's pretty well where we want that. I'm going to go ahead and bend our other one. So when we put that line on this one, I transferred it onto this one. So I just lined them up like this and transferred it. So go do the same on this one, and then we'll start making our slugs. So I'll give you a bit more of a close-up what I mean. So on my jig, I'll just take this out. I'm lining up with the start of my die in here. So when I have my tube, it draws the tube through this direction. So I have the arrow that way. So we jam it in there. And our line, this one here, lines up with the die there. So just there. And that is where it's going to live on all of them. Just so I can transfer it and do the easy stuff. So take the play out of it like that. And here is my indicator. So it's a little bit hard to see, it's a bit rusted, but I've got 0, all in 10s, all the way up to 180. So we're going to aim for, I think it was about 33, 34, and then we'll make it the same as the other one. So it's like a stage, this thing, so we just go 1 stage, 2, 3, 4, so what's that, 25 degrees, 30, So this is the one, a little bit past it. We just release the pressure, put it back on. So a little bit more. Release it, put it back on. So that looks about right. So now we pop this thing out. We put it up against the other one and make sure it's the same. Alright, so to make sure both our tubes are bent exactly the same, just put them up against each other like this, and then we look down here, make sure they're both parallel. We can't see any light down here, and the same with this side. If both of them line up perfectly with each other, they are bent exactly the same. So that's that. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to machine up some of these slugs. So basically what it has to do, it has to be 1 inch ID, and then it's going to have to neck down to suit the ID of this tube. So it doesn't have to be too much. Like I said, I'll probably go 1 inch into here, make sure it bottoms out into that. And then for this one, I'll make sure it goes in 1 inch into the original frame and then 1 inch into our new piece of frame. So I'll go through, quickly machine up them, and then we can tack in our bottom section. Alright, so we want to work out what size we want to make our slugs. So basically all we do, we just get our trusty little verniers here and we measure the ID. Now these things usually have a seam, so just make sure you don't measure on the seam. So this guy is like, what's that? 850 thou, so 0.85 of an inch. So what we want to do, we basically just want to measure the size of the bit that we're going to put into it, our new section, and that's pretty well the same. So something that I had prepared from earlier. These guys are just another nominal bore tube, so pretty sure in the States you guys will probably have the same tube. This is what we call an MB, so a nominal bore. So they measure the ID and then the tube gets thicker. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Put it in the comments if you guys know, or you Americans, let me know if you guys have nominal bore over there. So this is what we call 20 MB. This is the size I'm going to use for all the main pieces. This is a 20 MB. So this is pretty close to the Harley. So what do we got here? We have 1.11 and this is fucking 1.11-ish. So this is pretty close. This is a, what do they call, 20 MB heavy wall. So that's what I've got here. And this guy is, I think it's a 15 MB. Anyway, it's perfect size to go inside our tube like that. So what I did there, I just cut two at 2 inches, and that's my mark for 1 inch. So they're a pretty tight fit in there. You don't want them super tight, you don't want them loose either. So he knocks in like that, and then this thing will just go just like that. So that is basically as tight as you need it. You don't need it super tight, you also don't want it super loose. The other thing I'm going to do, just to make sure these don't move, I'm going to drill a hole through here so we can plug weld it. The idea of that is that if we drill this hole and then plug weld our inside tube to our outside tube, it can never move. But the way I'm going to weld this, you'll see, I'm going to make sure that we incorporate all 3 pieces into the same weld. So that's that one, that's pretty simple. But on our axle plate one here, so we're going to need an ID of 1 inch, right? And then it's going to have to be stepped because I want it to not fit this because it's going to plug up on there like that. So it's going to have to be stepped, like I said. So 1 inch OD here, and then the ID of this. So like I said, 850 or something it is. So it's going to be a 1 inch that steps down to an 850. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to cut up 4 of them and machine it. So they're going to have to be, what's that? 1.25 inches deep. And I probably wanted 1 inch into this guy. So they're going to be 2.25 inches each. So I'm going to jump on the lathe, machine these little step slugs, and then we can come through and start tacking some stuff up. Alright, so this is basically what I'm going to make for a slug. It is just a solid piece like that. I didn't have a smaller size tube that would work. When I tried to machine this side, it was just a bit thin. So I ended up having to use a piece of solid, and I just chucked a 1/2 inch hole through it. That can be whatever size you want. You don't have to put one in there at all. I just wanted to take some weight out of it. Anyway, this side, it fits the ID, sorry, of our tube, and this side fits the ID of the axle plates. So obviously I need to make 4 of these. So I'm just gonna speed this up and show you how to make one of them. Alright, there you have it. That is one of them knocked out. That probably took me, I don't know, 5 minutes or something. I'll just speed up the last video. So I think I got one more to make of these, and then we can go back to bending up some pipes for this rear end. Alright, so I have all my little bits here made. So like I said, one side goes in there, and then the other side will go into our tube like that. So something I've done off camera here, I've whacked a couple holes in the outside of where our little slugs sit. Now that's for sort of 2 reasons. One reason, we're going to tack this up and it's going to, you know, stop the slug from moving around inside. And the other reason is, if you've got a bit of movement in here, which I really don't, so the slug can't do this and pivot, and then it will stress fracture stuff. So 2 sort of reasons. In Australia, if you're going to get a frame engineered, you have to do all this crap, but once you weld it up and then I'm going to blend this off, you won't even see it. So just a little bit of a safety there. Anyway, so now that we've done all these and we've bent up our little bottom legs here, it's time to cut these to size. So all we're going to do, because I've got these slugs that are going to go in here like that, this makes it pretty easy. So I'm just going to cut the tube at the end of that and at the end of this. So all I'm going to do, these 2, just make sure that this flat bit is level to my bench, and that's the same height as the rest of the frame. So I'm just going to sit it on there like that, and I'm sitting it up against the frame, and I'm going to look in this direction. Just make sure it lines up. So that lines up really nicely there. So I'm going to mark this side just like that. Mark that like that, and then I'm going to also mark this one at the same time. So once I've done that, I've showed this trick in a couple other videos, but a lot of people were really amazed by how simple this was, but it works so well. This is just an average old pipe cutter. Now, if you want, we're going to cut this with a grinder, right? So I want a nice, clean, square cut. So the best way to get a clean, square line around this tube is chuck the cutter on there and just turn it a couple times. And that's it. you can see on there's a nice clean little line around the whole thing, and that is now square. If I cut it on that perfectly around, she's going to be square the whole way around. So I'm just going to double check this with my fine line. Yep, so once I've done that, like a mill gap here and here is sort of what we're chasing. So don't go crazy trying to make it as tight as possible, because I want to be able to get the weld in there and fill some gap, because we're going to be grinding the weld away. So I'm gonna go in the center of that. So same thing with this side. Get my little cutter right in the center of my mark there. I think I fucked this just before doing it on a hardened piece of steel, so I have to change the wheel, but it still does the same thing. Nice perfect square line around the whole thing. Put it back on. Yeah, sweet, that's going to line up nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this, and then we'll come back and slide it in there. What we're going to have to do, obviously, because I'm going to have a slug both sides like this, I'm going to have to do this side first, take the axle plate off, and then slide it back on and line it up again. Not the end of the world, sometimes just the fiddling you've got to do. Righto, so the same as the other side, I'm going to clean these up, and then I'm going to put a chamfer around the whole thing, like a nice big weld prep, just like we did on the frame here. So I'll just go do that, and we'll come back and make sure this thing fits. Alrighty, so I've cut this thing to length. I have chucked me holes in there, the same as what I did with the rest, and I put a nice big chamfer on this thing. So basically, we're just going to see if it fits before we put any of the crap in there. When I say crap, I mean these things. And like I said, I want a little bit of movement there, because I want a little bit of a weld prep going on there. So that's pretty good there. So the next thing, like I said, we're going to have to put a slug both sides and then put it in there. So what I'm thinking of doing, I think I might put this slug in here. I've got this a really nice fit. Just like that. So I've got my slug in there. You can see it inside the hole there, so I can do a plug weld on that, and that's going to be super strong. And then that guy goes up in there, well, not at the moment, but it goes in there like that. So I might just, oh, that's right there. And then this one, I'm going to hammer in that side. So we want this halfway in. Not much point in just hammering it the whole freaking way in. So I'm just going to mark this. It's 50 long. 25 through there, so 1 inch. Jam it in like that. Work on find my hammer, this'll do. Sweet. So what I'm gonna have to do here, where's my little spanner? I'm gonna have to take this side off. This is just a bogus little, I've made this rear jig section to suit my axle plates. Doesn't really suit cast ones very well, but it does work. So I'm going to slide in there. That sits there, that sits there. And then this guy, slip in there like that, and then we put it back in our spot here. Obviously I'm going to have to measure it up and make sure it's in the right spot again, but you get the idea. So that's that. And then there is our freaking tube in. Just want to move it down a little bit. There's my hammer. Is that all the way? Yeah, it is. Yeah, sweet. So that's sort of about where it's going to live. Like I said, I'm going to measure all this up and make sure it's in the right spot before I tack anything. The way I do that is just measure like this, and then I can also measure how far back it needs to go. So I'm going to get this pretty well where I want it, and then all I'm going to do is tack in here on all 4 of these, and that will sort of keep it in the right spot for me. But before I do that, I want to get the other side done so that I can measure our width here and make sure our legs aren't doing this. So I'm going to do that off camera, quickly do the other side, get it up to the same level, and then we can put our little gearbox support here and make sure our legs aren't on the piss down here. Alright, so I just wanted to show you something. Show you that this stuff doesn't always just, happen perfectly the first time. So this is what I was talking about. This is my gearbox cross member pressed plate here. So this is what the rear gearbox mount bolts to here. So I just use that as my spacer. So this makes these tubes the right width, so they're not too wide or too narrow. So you jam that in there like that. And then, so both of these tubes here are exactly the same angle bent here. So what I like to do when I've got these together like this is I like to get the tube, and because it doesn't slide in, but if you had an inch it'd slide in. I just want to look at the trajectory of this thing. So I want to make this straight with our cast axle plate here, and I'm not sure if you can see it, but it doesn't exactly line up with our thing here. See how it sort of comes in line with our top tube up the top here. So I want it to be a little bit higher like this. Now sure, you could be dodgy and get away with it, just make your little grind your slug out a little bit, but we're going to do this the right way. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take both these tubes out. So I've labeled them a right and a left. I'm going to take them out and take a little bit of bend out of them, and that will bring this up a little bit. So I'm going to take a degree or 2 out of both of them and then put them back in, and then hopefully this thing will line up a little bit nicer. So I'm just going to go and do that. The way I'm going to do that, I'm just going to put this back in my bender the opposite way around and just give it a little bit of a nudge. I'll show you what I mean, just so you can see what I'm talking about. Alright, so what I mean about putting this in backwards, I'm going to put it in just like this, so that the die is holding this side, and then where I want the bend to, take a bit out, just sitting on my little thing there. Just get an extension here that slides on just like that. And we're just going to give this a little bit of a, be surprised how little it takes. So I'm just going to put this one in the jig now and make sure it has the trajectory that we want, and then I'm going to make the other one the same. Alright, so after a little bit of fiddling, I have this thing pretty well dialed in now. Well, the bottom legs anyway. So before we go and tack this thing, you just want to triple check everything. Make sure everything is right. Maybe something moved while you were fucking around with something, who knows. So we want to check our centers again. So we just get our little square here, run him off here, measure to my center line. And we are gravy, it's still what it was before. I made sure my axle plates, I just have a datum point somewhere. I've just made a datum point on top of this hole here. That's 290, and so is the other side. I've already measured it. I have my little tube here. I just put that in it. Someone was probably yelling at their TV before. I've already made the slugs, I might as well do it. So if we look at that, that goes, the trajectory of that is straight through our little support here. So that is perfect. So I've made sure both these axle plates are in exactly the same spot. Like I said, fiddled around with it a bit. I put another brace. This is the other beauty of doing this on a big table like this. I've got just random bolts down the center of the jig. So I can put a clamp in it like this, and I can clamp these rear legs down so that they're perfectly level with the bottom of the table, and I can hold weight on it so when I tack it, nothing moves. So I have my trusty little TIG welder all set up here, I'm going to go through and tack those holes that we put in there and a few other little places just so it doesn't move. So I've got this thing set really hot because I want to burn right in there and get really deep in there, nice and deep like, and get some good tacks in it. I'm not looking to fill up my weld preps at all. I want to burn them in. So I'm just going to do really hot tacks in there just so that nothing moves. And then later when we come and weld this out, we can do a big hot pass over the top of it. Now sure, a lot of you are probably going to be doing this with a MIG welder. Forgot to say that if you were doing the same thing I'm doing with a MIG welder, I would give yourself more of a weld prep. You know, give yourself a few millimeters that you can fill up with your MIG welder. With a TIG, it's a bit nicer. I can sit there and burn it in without putting any filler in, and it'll really penetrate, where obviously with a MIG welder, you're always adding material. So I would recommend using a TIG welder for this, but if you're at home, you're a MIG daddy, get it done. Alright, so we have our bottom legs all tacked in now, all tacked up. So the next thing we want to do is get started on these top legs. Now these ones are a little bit harder, so it's good that we started with the bottom ones. Just fucking started pissing down at my place, so there's a bit of interference on the audio, not much I can do about it. So the next one we want to do, right, we're going to measure it up exactly the same way we measured the bottom one. We're just going to get our tape measure and just do a rough little measure here. So about 700, so always give it a bit more so we can cut off front and back depending on what we need. But 700, look, here's one that I have already cut. So basically I've just got our little spigot in here. If you're doing inch pipe, this will just push straight into the axle plate, but oh, come on mate, a bit tight. Oh, I've made that too nice, haven't I? That'll do for what was. So basically the way this top tube works, it has a little tiny bend, maybe 50 mil away from the axle plate, and then it comes up and then has a really big bend up here. I have a frame over here, I might as well show you what I mean by that. Alright, so on this thing you can sort of get an idea what I mean here. So here's our bottom leg, our top leg here. And at the bottom there, it's a little bit hard to see, there is a tiny little bend right there. So it goes straight, little bend, and then it has a big bend at the top. So this guy is about 20 degrees, that guy is like 3 to 5 degrees. So like I said, it's about 50 mil away from the end of the axle plate. It's a bit hard to see on this because it's been molded, but 50 mil, and then further away up the top here, we have this last bend that comes in here, and this is what our middle support will weld to. So we've got to achieve the same thing over here. So let me set this up a bit better and I'll show you how we're going to work that out. Alright, so we whack this back in here, I clearance this a little bit so it fits nicer. So with my bender, that is where the bend starts, but it's not to the center of the bend. So I can give you that measurement. So this is 50, so that's to this, that's where my bender starts. So I think it's 25 mil after that. So to the center of the bend is 75 mil off the end of our axle plate here. So the best place to start is just by bending that first. So I'm going to go over to the bender and I'm just going to put a 3 to 5 degrees bend in this. Alright, so I have my first bend done here. I accidentally crushed this a little bit, so I had to give that a bit of a spruce up, but she's all good now. So now is the hard part. So now we need to work out where this bend is going to start so that it intersects our center casting here. So I want the pipe to lay in here. Come out. I want the pipe to lay in there like that. This is a little bit small at the moment. I'll get to fixing that later. I want to lay the pipe in there like that. So this becomes a little bit tricky. Try and work out where you need to be. So this is where your scrap bits of steel you've got laying around really come in handy. So I know this bend is somewhere close to where I want it to be because I've just put it up against a normal frame and this bend is pretty well the correct degrees. It's about 20 to 23 degrees. So this is somewhat close, so this is going to get me in the right ballpark. So, as I said, this guy has the mark where it starts on my bender, so I can transfer this to this pipe when I have it in somewhere near the right spot. So what we do, we chuck it up on there like this. That's sort of sitting where we want it. We're going to line up this tube with the bottom tube and then have a look where it intersects our little thing here, somewhere there, and then we're going to put our mark on it there. So that is where my bend will start. So something important to remember. Now that we have two bends on one bit of tube here, so on our bottom we only had one bend, so we didn't have to worry about plane. But now because we're putting two bends in the same bit of steel, we have to worry about the plane. When I say plane, I mean we want these bends to be in exactly the same direction. If you think of this thing being horizontal, I want both bends to be horizontal. I don't want one bend to be fucking round here and the other one to be round the back. They've got to be flat to each other. So what we do when we do that, we whack it in the bender, get it up to, don't forget, we want to bend in that direction. Before I forget, yep. So we put it in the bender and then we just twist it until this bend is horizontal and then we know it's going to bend the right way. So I'll take this over to my little bender and I'll show you what I mean. Alright, so let's chuck this guy in. So just remember, not only do we want this on the same plane, we want these bends to go the same direction because it's sort of doing an arc like this. So just make sure you have this round the correct direction as well. So that guy in there, we want the bend to go that direction. The job gets pulled through the machine. Just always got to remember that. I have confused myself that many times in the past and fucked it up. It's easy to do, no matter how much you do. So basically what you do, you just get down here and you just twist your pipe until you get your bend to exactly the same as what your die is. So basically horizontal. My bend is a little bit on the piss, so my die is a little bit below horizontal, but when you have a bigger bend, you can always put a what do they call it? An angle finder on there and it'll tell you the different angles, but this is pretty good there. Righto, so we are aiming for about 22 degrees or something. So let's do some bending. We've got 18. I think that should just about do it. Release it, put it back. That's 20. I want a little bit more than 20. Go a halfie. There we go, that's like 22, 23. So let's pull this out and see how we went. Alright, so let's see how we did with our little pipe here. So that is pretty well, worked out pretty well to be honest. See, it comes in, sort of sucks in nice and close to our little cross member here, and then comes up here. It's probably hard for you to see. I might get you in a bit closer. I've got a little mark here of where I want the tube to finish. Alright, so when I chuck this in here, it goes like that, and before I do that, see this little black line I've got here? So I put that line on there so that I know whereabouts I want the tubes to finish. Now it's super, super handy if you have a frame lying around that you're copying or that you're just gonna, you know, take some little bits and bobs from. So just in case you don't, from this line to the back of my casting here is 170 mil. You Imperial players at home are just gonna have to convert that. If you need a little bit of help, 25.4 millimeters to an inch. You guys can work the rest out. So basically what we do, we just chuck this in here, and if I have a look up here, this tube pretty well finishes on the end where I want it to. So obviously this is going to change a bit because I have the tube sitting on top of this main tube here, but this will twist. So at the moment, we just want to mark whereabouts we're going to cut this thing. So we mark this straight line on this backbone onto our tube here. Now remember, it's easy to take it away. It is impossible to add it back on. So take a little bit at a time. So all I've done is made a mark like that, and as long as I cut that square to these other bends, I'll be pretty sorted. So the easiest way to cut this is in a drop saw. Now you guys are probably, you know, actually you Americans are unsafe as fuck, so you guys will probably think it's fine, but it's pretty sketchy. I'll show you how to do it. Alright, so sure you could use a grinder for this, but a drop saw is always going to be a dead straight cut. So that's the reason why I use drop saws for this. Now we've gotten rid of the vise because that's for pussies, and we're just going to hold this with our hand at the right angle. So we just line it up here. Like I said, it's easier to take more away than to put more back on. So let's go with this. Oh, you fucking plug it in. Alright, round two. Let's try this again. I got it plugged in now. So you see how the cut is dead straight. So you wouldn't be able to do that with a grinder, and that's why you do it on this humble guy. Let's go have a look how we did. Alrighty, let's freaking check this out. Alright, so there's a little bit of shit going on here. So, firstly, on a frame, like an original frame, you've got another little dog leg here. So it goes straight up on the same plane through here, and then you've got a dog leg that pulls this back down so it's in line with your backbone. So we're not really worried about how high this is compared to this because I'm gonna pull this down at the end. All I'm worried about is that this guy lines up with this guy like that. So a few things going on here. One, our thing is too long. You see how far past our mark it is? And the other is we've got a big gap here. So there's two things we can do to fix that. If we make this bend a bit more, bend this in a bit, it's gonna make the tube finish sooner. So it won't be so far past our mark. So I think what I'm gonna do is put a little bit more bend in this, and then we'll come back and cut this again. And then hopefully with a bit more bend and this cut, it'll line up a bit better on our little casting here. So I'm going to go and do that and we'll see what happens. Alright, so I have given this a little bit more of a bend. Alright, so we're on the right track here. See how we have gotten closer? That has actually gone all the way in there. So this guy is pretty well where we need it inside our casting here. So that's mint. And then if we follow the outside of our pipe, it lines up with our hole as well. So all that means is we've just got to cut another little bit here. So we're going to do the same thing, just change the angle a little bit, mark it. Sometimes you can put a rule on it like that, give it a mark. Sometimes you need 4 hands to be able to do this shit. Alright, so I want to cut it through there. So I'm going to go do me dodgy cut on me droppy, and then let's have a look what it looks like. Alright, so after a bend and a freaking trim, we are looking freaking primo. So like I was saying, this sort of has another bend down, and something I prepared earlier, here's the other side completed. Magic of television, isn't it great? So that is that side, and that is, come on bro. That is that side. So the way this works, those two are both the same now, and what they have is a little tiny kick down in these top tubes here. So what I'm going to do to achieve that, because I've already cut these to length, this is the easy way to do it, I can't put these in the bender and then bend this back down straight. So what I usually do, I weld all this out down on the axle plates and up here in the position that I want them. And then I just come through here with a bit of heat and heat this spot here and bend this down to where I want it. It's just an easy way to get that last little kick in it, and to be honest, that's probably how they do it from factory. That's what it looks like. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. I'm gonna get something here to hold these together so they're in the same spot. And then we're gonna come through and I'm gonna show you how we're gonna measure these, make sure they're the same width and all that sort of stuff. Then we're gonna come through, prep this thing and tack it up. Righto, so I pretty well got this thing all sorted out. I mited all the ends on the tubes down here so that it has a nice weld prep. I put my trusty little ratchet strap on here. That just holds them together, holds them in the right spot for when I need to tack it. I drilled these holes in here like we did for the rest of it, so this thing's pretty well ready to tack together. The only thing that we want to check is how wide this thing is. So these should be pretty well the same width as the bottom of the frame. So I've got, I don't know, 1 mil or 2 clearance there, and I've already checked it, so I do know, but I have basically the same here. So I'm pretty sorted on width, so just make sure they're the same. The other thing you can do is, we know these are the same points, so we can put this along here and then measure down, and I'm pretty well square there as well. So basically all there is to do now is tack this thing. Like I said, we're not going to worry about these top guys here because we're going to weld all this together, and then I'm going to put a bit of heat here, and then we're going to bend these down till they're in line with the top tube. Just an easy way to do it. Alright, so let's tack this together the same way we did for the bottom few tubes. We're just going to tack this in a few places. Nice and freaking hot because we don't want it to move. That noise you can hear, is it moving? So just keep a freaking eye on it, that it isn't doing something you don't want it to. Stop your moving. Couple tacks at the top here should stop it twisting. That's really the only thing I'm worried about. Alrighty, that is pretty well it. Couple more tacks and then we'll go and tackle this top bit, I reckon. Alright, so I basically have most of this rear section all tacked up now. The last thing I was talking about I wanted to do was I want to bend this last little bit down and get that in line with our top tube. Now there's a few reasons they've done it like that. The main reason is the head sits like right here. So if you were to pull this down and have it come in square, it would hit the head. So I'm going to do this probably the cheap way. I'm just going to put a bit of heat in here and use my, what the fuck's this called again? Turnbuckle. I'm going to use my turnbuckle here to pull it down. Yes, I could have gone in here, left this long and then bent it down, but it is a bit of a gamble. It's pretty hard to do it that way. This is just the easy, surefire way to make sure you don't fuck it up. So basically the way this thing works is we have a right hand and a left hand thread here. So when I turn this, this gets smaller or it gets larger depending on which way I turn it. And these things are super, super strong and you can pull in a linear direction, which is exactly what we're gonna do. So I've just got a little chain here. I'm gonna chain this around the bottom, go through the hook on it, and then I'm gonna tack it there like that. So when I tack it to that, I can just heat this little bit here and then turn my buckle and it will bend this thing down into position. So I'm gonna struggle with this off camera, I think, and tack this on, unless this wants to play the game. Maybe it does. So I'm gonna tack this guy on here. Tacks are quite strong, so don't go and put a massive one on there. It doesn't need it. So I'm gonna go and tack this guy on off camera, and then I'm just gonna time lapse this and just quickly do it. I've just got my trusty LPG burner, nothing special. I'm not using Oxy or anything, just an LPG burner. Oxy acetylene is super expensive in Australia, go figure. Everyone in the States seem to have it, it must be cheap. Anyway, I'm just gonna time lapse this, let's do it. Alright, so that is pretty well it. You can see what I was sort of going with there. Sort of comes up and then has this nice little kick down. You can still see where the old pipe is, where the other side is, and that's where it used to be. So it turned out super nice and tight in there, so we'll get a good weld in that. I put a nice weld up here just so it wouldn't move when I put this heat into it. But you can see what I did. It's basically just in between the tube there, come down and has a nice little bend in it like that. So I've already moved my turnbuckle to the other side, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that side now. All right, that is pretty well it for this episode on this hardtail from scratch. On the next episode, I'm gonna go through, we're gonna finish off all our little gearbox bits, We're going to go through and bend up this last tube that goes between our top tubes there. And I'm going to go through in detail and show you how we need to weld this thing out. There is a bit of a process to it, so it does pay to do it the right way, which makes your life a lot easier and makes it a lot stronger. Now, I want to know what you at home use to weld. Are you a MIG daddy or are you a TIG king like I am? Please drop a comment, tell me what you are, and maybe I'll have to do a full MIG daddy one day and show you how it's done. But anyway, keep an eye out for the next one, and I'll see you then.